Okay, good evening, everybody. Hope everyone's okay. Hope everyone is good. Sorry, let me just change something over here. Bear with me a second. Right, another, I suppose interesting week that we've actually had. I think we've kind of discussed it through Discord and Friday's charting conversation, but we have seen assets moving to the upside. BitTensor, in particular, one of the biggest positive movers of the last 7 days, and currently sitting around about $280. So a very strong move from the local bottom we saw about 140. We'll obviously go into BitTensor and have a look at the price action there. But of course, we're going to focus on Bitcoin. And the question, I suppose, really is, are we starting to see the rise out of that local bottom? And if we are, how much further can we go? Is there room for us to get excited about? And I'm going to try and give as balanced an opinion as I can on that one. And yeah, we'll go from there. I did get one question this week, which we'll talk about. Bit of a controversial one, I suppose, but we will discuss it. But if you've got anything you want to add, just feel to drop it in the chat. Well, we will certainly get round to it. But without any further ado, let's just jump into the charts. So now let's definitely move that out of the way. Hey there, Jordan. Hope you're good. The video covered this week. Yeah. Not sure about President Trump as Iron Man. He's certainly not thought of very favorably around the world at the moment. But we'll leave the geopolitical side to one side. Bitcoin 3-day time frame. Let's blow it up on the bigger chart. We've finally made that break through the $72,000 level. We actually started that move back end of last week. We actually have peaked in and around 76,000 in the early hours of this morning. Bit of a pullback since then, but actually now that we have cleared that 72,000 level, assuming we can stick the candle in over this next candle, there is a good chance that actually that 79 to 80,000 level we've been talking about for a number of weeks is the next level to take us to. There's a lot of further evidence to perhaps support that there is a draw towards that line. But we've broken out of that range. We have made a new local high. And ultimately, this is what is fueling that bullish narrative. I'm going to jump into this first, just because it's might as well talk about since it's Bitcoin related. And that bullish narrative is, flowing into the ETFs. We've now seen 6 days in a row where we've had a positive net inflow, which, given we are in a bear market, given the collapse of Bitcoin from 126,000 down to 60,000, we have generally seen much more red days than we've seen black days. But for us to finally get 6 working days in a row is kind of a testament to at least where the sentiment currently lands. This is what it actually looks like in terms of the sentiment there. Now, you could argue that the numbers aren't exactly stellar, but as long as they're in the black or the green, however you want to look at it, then we are seeing interest coming back into the market, as limited as it may be. The point of this article then goes on to talk about, however, and I think it's worth that sort of balanced view, I suppose, is levels of FOMO. So the not necessarily fear and greed, although fear and greed index does play into this, but actually overall FOMO. So Bitcoin's ratio of positive versus negative commentary on social media is how the data is actually derived. And we are at the highest level of FOMO we've been pretty much this year. I think it is since either the beginning or the end of January. I'm pretty certain it's the beginning if I look at it somewhere. So, whilst, yes, we have seen a move up and, from 60,000 to 74,000, it is a 20-25% move up from there. So nothing to necessarily be sniffed at. But we seem to be getting to the point now where actually people are getting excited and moving in. The only problem with levels of FOMO is just the caution to the wind, that this is an ideal opportunity to trap people in. Maybe still a little bit more room to climb just to really ensnare some people within that FOMO. But once we start to see those levels creeping in, it usually is a sign of actually further falling to come. This is the chart kind of here, and it kind of blocks out where sort of the FOMO is. And this only goes back for a month, I'm afraid. So we can't see, but you can notice that on the far right-hand side, it's got the highest level of FOMO here. There's nothing on this level, this yellow line throughout the last 4 weeks that shows it. I think it does go all the way back to January before it peaks at that height. But the point being here that generally over the red line, it's generally considered quite a greedy sort of level. And we are significantly above that. Matter of fact, over the last 3 months, we've never seen levels like this. It's something to be concerned about. Now, interestingly enough, the fear and greed index actually still has us in fear, but we have lived in such extreme fear for such a long period of time that actually getting into fear is now considered a fear of missing out kind of level. So maybe the fear and greed index isn't quite reflective of actual real sentiment at the moment, or maybe actually just the positive news that is being picked up in that FOMO calendar and via social media. It's just because we've been in the dungeons for so long. The fact that we've actually broken that level, people are starting to think that the bull market is back. 60k was the bottom, and we are about to move to Valhalla. I don't personally believe that myself. I think we kind of talked about through February that March we may see that move up, that we don't move down in straight lines. 4-year cycle, typical timeframes kind of tie in with around about March having some sort of relief rally. I think all of that is coming into play at the moment, and whilst it is good to see, I have to agree with the currently 83% of you. Don't know how many people have actually put in on it that suggest that this may well be a bull trap. And so I am tentative in sort of how we approach this, and I haven't really moved back into the market from a spot point of view. Still trying to find some trades, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But that's just kind of where I see that at the moment. Going back to the 3-day time frame. Sorry, we jumped from that one. And we'll have a look at something else. Bitcoin dominance. I said I was going to remove this because it's not really giving us much at the moment. Again, sitting just above 59%. We're up, we're down, we're left, we're right. It's not really giving us that clear break of one side or the other. Interestingly enough, we actually now see that alt season, it's not quite there. 75 you need to get to alt season. We're currently sitting at 55. It's pretty much mid of the range. But actually, we've spent so much time closer to Bitcoin season that the latest pumps in altcoins, and it's not just BitTensor, Zcash had a nice pump as well, and plenty of other ones have actually had some decent moves up, that altcoins are starting to get a little bit more love in where it is. Now, as I always say, and you can go back through history when you look at this chart, if it's not really moving, you have to do it this way. Altcoins, when we get above 75, they don't burn for long. They may be bright, but they really don't burn for long. So if we do get above that 75, I would be, just seriously considering how much more sentiment we've got for alt seasons in terms of their moving. And of course, they don't have to tie in with an actual genuine alt season, as in everything moving up. We're in a bull market. We can still have an alt season on the way down, just the alts are moving in a better direction than Bitcoin is. So something else there to consider. In terms of the total market, we have broken back above. This is total too, so everything but Bitcoin. We have broken above that $1 trillion level. I think that was a very key level for us to break through. And of course, with Bitcoin breaking 74, it's kind of tied in. But we've now moved above it. The key really here for that sustained move is to stay above it. Obviously, we've had a little bit of a pullback today, fair enough, but nothing too bad. And again, if we can sort of manage to build off that $1 trillion level, then maybe there is an opportunity for a move up to, oops, why did I not draw a line? I don't know. So this level here, about 1.15 trillion, was a decent level of support for us back through the end of last year. I remember mentioning that level quite a lot. But that move there, and I actually think, Bitcoin's moving to 80K, which is around about, I don't know, what's that? 5-7% of its current position. Altcoins from here to 1.15 is actually, it's nearly 10%, probably a little bit a little bit over 10%. So we could actually see that alt season metric kind of rise higher as alt seasons just generally do a little bit better than Bitcoin over the journey towards their respective levels of resistance for us to have a look at. Now, no guarantee that's going to happen, but it's certainly something to consider just from looking at this. And then we get on to BitTensor, and this is the move that, a lot of us have been waiting for. You could certainly argue not me, since I've sold my BitTensor. But we broke out that symmetrical triangle. We talked about this on Friday, that strong move up. And we actually mentioned we hadn't really come back to these yellow lines in some time. So on Friday, we extended those out. And it's interesting. That's exactly what we careered into at the moment. These lines here, now, when we were using them, There was little nuances that we could move them up and down, but they've generally just been saved there because they've played an interesting part of support and resistance pretty much since the beginning of 2025. There's been some form of interaction in and around those. And so we just left them on the chart. And as I said, yes, we've spent some time away from them, but our first opportunity to get through them, and we may still do it within this candle. But right now, we are actually, after a stellar move over the last sort of week and a half, we're finally starting to see a little bit of a pullback, maybe some exhaustion as we run into this resistance. And I haven't bothered to have a look at the order book, but I dare say there's probably a decent amount of sell orders that we're building in and around that. And just bear in mind where this wick sits at the moment. That sits at bang on 300. We're going to talk about the top of that wick a little bit later on, but you cannot disagree with a positive move for BitTensor there. I managed to get into a long at the end. We talked about this yesterday, I think it was. It wasn't the best move, about 230 to 282. I sold it yesterday, and it did go higher, but I was just looking to try and get out of that position after making at least something on this move, given I'm not in the spot positions right now. Anyway, that's where we sit with those. We'll cover some other altcoins in a moment, but let's just get into Bitcoin. I'm going to have a quick swig of tea as well, if that's okay. Try not to slurp down the microphone because it's a bit hot as I'm trying to take it into the mouth there. But anyway, here we are, Bitcoin 12-hour time frame. And for those of you that weren't here on Friday, I've left this on, but this was the liquidation zone that we were looking at. And actually, whilst we were having that conversation on Friday, this move came straight up into it. And just look where it turned around. It got all the way up to this white line here on the Fibonacci level at just under 74,000. For those of you that, I suppose, not been here longer than 2.5 years, it's based on the all-time high that was set in March of 2024. And it just so happened that was the exact turnaround point, which also at the time just so happened to be the very peak of that trap liquidity that had been built from the short side. So the market makers moving it up there, running into a very significant all-time high back from 2 years ago, forming the top of this Fibonacci level, and it having to come back down. It came down fairly rapidly on Friday. And then what we actually saw over the weekend is this just stellarly building up quite nicely until we've had that level there at 76 we talked about. But the point I'm trying to make now with this is what we're finding support. We've got through 74,000, excuse me. We pulled back to it over the last candle, and we're just building it as a bit of a support at the moment. I'm sorry I didn't go on to CoinAnk to have a look at the next levels up. Apologies for that. But the area that I am interested in, and yes, it is a 12-hour time frame, so we don't always use it, but just look where the 200 level is on the 12-hour right now, 79,000. So we've got a range here, sort of at 200 EMA. If we are building support off this fib level, a journey up to that next fib level around about 82, and then we've got this this EMA at 79. This is starting to build the picture of some of the areas that I'm kind of interested in. So that's 79,000. I was going to say 81, but I suppose we're going to use 82 now just for this fib level as well, in terms of being able to sort of maybe have that move up towards that over the next few, I'm going to say days. Maybe it takes another week, but certainly something there to consider. Why have I got this news article open? I'm not entirely too sure. I don't know. We'll come back to that. When we look at Bitcoin, it's not on the weekly. When we look at Bitcoin on the weekly time frame, picture that we have seen before, and before we even put any fib levels on this, I was actually going to open up with this chart. But if any of you are, just confused as hell as the price action of price movement, or you want to temper your enthusiasm or even your nerves, just have a look at these last three candles. Ignore this candle. Ignore the candle that's currently existing. Have a look at these two candles here, if I can get my pen out. Where is it? These two here. And I've drawn over three. But you get the two green candles. That's what I'm looking at. Because beginning of March, so just when the war announced, we had this massive move up. And then in that weekly candle, we lost it all. And it created one hell of, I don't even know what you call those, like some sort of like death's candle or something, where we have an incredibly long wick to the north, a tiny little body and a little head. Just sort of suggested that the sell pressure was absolutely outrageous during that time. generally in a falling market continuation kind of pattern there. That's what you would assume. That's how we were talking about it. And then the very next week, we pretty much engulf and recover that entire candle. And so, yes, okay, we were expecting March to have that bump and that run up, which it has gone and had, and that's fine. But just in terms of looking at TA and sort of, you know, maybe just glancing over certain charts and not really giving any thought, you could be excused for just the level of confusion that this kind of causes, or the mixed emotions where it is in terms of, you know, sustained falling over 4 or 5 weeks, compounded in the space of 1 week by an incredible move up, only to be, you know, the wind knocked out of you and absolutely collapse back down as what the tensions in the Middle East turn out into an all-out war. You're going to assume it's a further continuation to the downside, but the market's actually gone and reacted in completely the different way. And what we've actually seen is, you know, a near a 15% increase over the period, and recovering, as I say, the majority of that candle. Now, the candle we got at the moment has taken that clear. So it is a mixed kind of picture. And as I say, trading this can be quite difficult. So there are times where just sitting on your hands is kind of where we need to be. But if we do want to just take a little bit of a step back, just remind ourselves of the overall picture we found ourselves in, and then maybe we can sort of try and understand it. So we'll work down as clean a charts as we can through the time frames, weekly to daily, and we'll just see if we can have that picture. And as I say, you know, we've had the fall, okay? What did we expect down here? What we kind of talked about? I know on the weekly it doesn't show, but on the daily it did show a lot better. We were just basically ranging here, similar to how we've ranged in this picture before making that sort of that move back down. And we've had, you know, a rather stellar fall. Even this second fall from 98,000 down to 60,000, nearly a 40,000 drop. You know, what would we normally say we would expect? 50% recovery. Well, we've got to have, you know, to have that recovery, the green candles have to appear at some stage. And despite the climb from 60,000 to 76,000, that is still shy, technically, of a 50% recovery. In that instance, we would probably be looking in and around 79,000 for that to be the case. So, yeah, hey, 76 may end up being as far as it goes. Not always someone there with a check mark is saying, right, we've hit 50%, it's time to fall back down. But if we are to think that we're going to get some sort of relief rally, then these kind of candles have to be expected. But ultimately, you know, can we really get too excited about this yet? Has the trend changed? And for me, the answer is no. Yes, okay, we can try and take advantage of these kind of moves. But for me, something even more significant has to show up for me to write off the fact that actually we are in a relief rally in which we expected it to be, in a time frame we thought it was going to happen at. And actually what is more than likely going to happen, the higher probability play, is that actually at some stage the sellers are going to step in. The amount of buy pressure is going to dry up. FOMO is going to, or fear is going to return to the market. And actually we're going to see any of these recent gains start to move away as we actually move through this section of the 4-year cycle and we start to feel a bottom wherever that is, somewhere later in the year. So I don't think that has really changed. And if we do want to add a couple of, you know, just standard ones that we've used over time on there, we've got the 20 and the 50 EMA, and we can see at the moment that even with this, I'm going to call it a slight recovery. It is a fairly decent recovery, don't get me wrong. We haven't even come back and challenged the 20 EMA, never mind the 50 EMA. 20 EMA currently sitting around about 82,000. That's a number we've talked about already today. And so there is some logic to suggest that actually maybe we could start to continue that move up, hit that, and then we start to feel a real pinch in terms of how that turns around. One thing that I hadn't really noticed, but we might as well do it because it's crossed my mind. But in this period that we did range, I think we talked about this last week. It's kind of, what was it? It was an 8 weeks kind of period of ranging here. We're not at the 8 weeks yet. That's not going to be till the end of the month. But actually also, and I'm not saying there's going to be any correlation, don't get me wrong here. But in that period through November, December, and January, where we did range, we went down to 80,000, then back up to 98. As we were getting close to 98,000, there were a lot of people already, expressing their delight at the 20% move and how this was just the beginning. And the point I suppose I'm trying to make is, has anything really changed, in what we've experienced so far? Yes, it's a 26% move. So rightly so, there's FOMO back in the market. ETFs are picking up. People are quite happy. The narrative suddenly shifting to perhaps we have found the bottom. But it's not a massive difference, like 4% difference in terms of price over a relatively similar period, where as soon as that reversed and the market fell away again, it was doom and gloom, articles about Bitcoin being a Ponzi and dead, and everything else was suddenly coming back into the market. So, in terms of how strong this has been over the last sort of 6 weeks, or particularly over the last 2 weeks, yes, okay, an impressive 25% recovery from the local bottom. But it's not earth-shattering. It isn't enough for us to actually say we have broken out of this downtrend. And we don't normally sort of touch on these, particularly as we're halfway through a month, although we are getting close to the end of quarter one. But even if you have a look at Bitcoin quarterly return, despite that positive 25% bump that I just talked about, we're still 15, 16% down on the first quarter. And if you want to roll it down to actually have a look at it from a monthly point of view, yes, it is a 10% increase. But actually, over recent histories, March has always been a pretty good month for us. So I don't think there is enough in this move so far to say to me, Harry, I think you're wrong. We need to actually reevaluate what we're doing with this market. And it can be difficult, particularly if you are out of the market and you've decided to take that sidestep. Always second guessing, I could have made some better gains if I'd held on, or whatever that may be. But just allow yourself the time, the luxury of time, if you will, for that to play out. Wait for the market to tell you you're wrong, rather than getting swept up with the fact that you might be wrong. And yeah, okay, sometimes that's going to come and smack you around the face, and you should have got in earlier. But 9 times out of 10, you will actually find that patience will pay off, whichever way you are trying to play it. So I think that's always something to bear in mind. Let's just clear those, because we're going to drop down onto the daily time frame. And I now remembered why I had that news article, so I've got to remember to come back to that. So we just dropped down to the daily time frame. We can have a look at how that picture is forming. And there is a bit of a flip, particularly when you've got these EMAs on there. I'm going to take them off for a second, just because I want to try and draw some lines on here first. But even that, we can kind of see there's a bit of a narrative kind of change. So previous range was a lot easier to draw, and we oops. Sorry though. I can find it now. Previous range moved fairly simplistically in terms of, you could draw pretty much straight lines between that, and it went from top to bottom, and it worked out quite nicely. Obviously, nothing ever mirrors, but there was a conversation that actually this was looking very similar until recently, obviously, where we had sort of this mentality there kind of working its way through. Now that's kind of changed with how this has gone. We have broken out to the top side of that, and even when you've drawn this line here, if you're saying that was previous resistance, it actually now over this today worked as quite a nice level of support. So now it's a case of, well, are we now sort of line fitting? Because if we did move it to wicks, which I'm more of a body kind of guy, we know, but the wicks, they actually do line up to say that actually we're still within this range. But I'm going to keep it down here and just say, look, there is a range that we were operating within. We have broken out to the top side of that range. We haven't made that move away from it yet. So one, there is an opportunity to still accept that this is an area of support for that next leg up to, let's say, the high 70s, early 80,000 level. And maybe there's an opportunity to take advantage of that. But there's also still, maybe the jury's out that our lines aren't the best, and we're so close to it that making that move right now, just leaping back in and buying spot, you could end up with egg on your face. And so we just got to try and pitch how that goes. And I am, I am positive with how we have managed to get through this level, and we are building up. But as I put out on Discord yesterday, and I won't bother bringing it up, I've just put it up on the other screen. But I was talking about, and it is probably nothing, but just a little bit of food for thought, is in the last 4 years, how many times has Bitcoin posted 9 green candles in a row? Or 8 it was, I suppose. And there was one other time, I believe, or was it? Yeah, it was 7 daily candles. It was 2 times. which was April last year and then November of 2024. So climbing out of the tariff collapse, if you will, and then post Donald Trump's election win, not his inauguration, when he actually won it. And we saw the market did rally for 7 days in both instances from that. But after that, we were significantly high on the RSI. We were in the 70s, high 70s, even in the 80s on the Fear and Greed Index. And what we actually ended up seeing was a significant retrace. Now, in both instances, we were still within the bull market. So obviously that continued to climb. But we did see pullbacks from that. Well, yesterday we actually posted a green candle, taking it to 8 days, an even rarer occurrence. I'm just trying to read the tweet because I can't remember sort of going back through it. No, that's it. So I think I found only one instance of 8 days in a row. And that was back in 2023 when we were climbing out of the market. So given that we're actually in a bear market, and unless anyone is now saying that we're not in a bear market, I believe we are in a bear market. But to post 8 days in a row does suggest to me, one, as strong as that is, and as good as that is to happen, we must be looking pretty exhausted, overbought on metrics. And so a pullback is to be expected. And the problem that I have is we've only just managed to dip our head above the level of resistance that we've had through this range that we've been tracking for the last 6 weeks. And so if this is, we're actually too tired, we're going to start to see a bit of a pullback. Getting in now is just, in my opinion, a dangerous place to do it. I would much rather use other metrics, which will bring the RSI up in a little bit, wait to see that reset, then see where we can find some supports. So that's just sort of, I suppose, my health warning on where it sits. Now, when we do add the EMAs, the one thing I will say is price action is the right side of both of these. This move over the last week and a half has taken us through not just the 20, but the 50 EMA on the daily time frame. When we look at the 50 EMA with all the others, we're actually still within the cloud of the 50 EMA, but we have broken above it. We haven't come down to retest it, but this maybe gives us a couple of levels in which maybe we will come back down to retest before we see RSI sort of cooling off a little bit and it's building up from that. And so I would actually be looking really in and around 70,000, this sort of 20 EMA level. Yes, the 50 may absolutely hold. I think that's going to be a hard one to call, but a pullback down to 70K, which is going to be around about a 50% move, helping that RSI reset a little bit before finding some sort of support and climbing back through, which, don't get me wrong, would also fit with sort of the narrative of, I can't draw it because it's not there, but it'll be something along those lines. So continuing the trend of higher highs and higher lows as we go through is something that I could absolutely look to see. So I would be marking off now. Before we had sort of like 66,000. Now I'd be getting interested if we get in and around that 70,000 level. If we can get back down to here, I want to be paying attention to the charts to try and see where this is going. And then can we find the buyer stepping back in to take us up to the next level, 79, 82,000, however that may form. So that's what I'd be looking at there. Now, I said I brought this news article up for a reason, and it's just one of these classic ones of 5 things you know about Bitcoin. I wasn't really too fussed about most of these. I can't remember what it was now. CME, that's what it was. CME gaps. Sorry, I remember now. And people, whoops, I saw people immediately flocking to Twitter, X, whatever it is you want to call it, and effectively say, how can you be super bullish at a time like this? Bitcoin's been climbing, as I said, for 7-8 days. And whilst the markets were closed over the weekend, Bitcoin opened up. And what did we do? We ran smack bang into, we created a CME gap. And that CME gap sits in and around 71,000 to 72,000, that kind of red box area that we label there. And of course, I am the type of person who will always say CME gaps typically get filled. So at some stage, I will expect that gap to be filled. However, I think it's kind of, in your face to talk about a 71,000 CME gap, but then not address the CME gap at 80 to 81,000, because that's still perfectly in play as well. It's actually not that far away from where price and action is at the moment. And so for people to just sort of write off this move just because, we pumped over the weekend when everything else was shut, and we formed the CME gap, I think is narrow-sighted, because actually, yes, we may be overbought, but the trend is still currently up. And so there's just as good a chance that we will be attracted towards that 80,000 level. As a matter of fact, if how I described it plays out, is maybe we get that pullback to 70K, closing this CME gap, and then we have that move up here, closing that CME gap. I mean, so I'm not so saying that we should throw in the towel over the short period of time and give up on this bullish trend just because the CME gap's fallen. I think maybe we just need to pick and choose our battles where that is. Now, one of the things that is happening tomorrow, it's not particularly a big event this time because it is an absolute foregone conclusion as to what's going to happen, but it's the FOMC. And if you remember back beginning of last week when we talked about the VIX being at 34, I kind of said this is given, in my opinion, risk on assets the ability to run until the next major market event. And despite the fact that the next major market event is pretty much known that we are going to keep interest rates at the exact same level, I actually think what has a greater chance of upsetting the market is going to be the conference. It's going to be Chairman Powell talking about the war in Iran. The first time he has been able to talk about that and to, well, let's face it, dodge questions from journalists when they try and link back the pressures, the financial, economic pressures that is going to put on the market. The big one is obviously going to be inflation. Okay, oil prices are going up. It doesn't really look like that pressure is going to ease anytime soon. And I don't want to really get into it, but, in terms of reopening the Strait of Hormuz, that doesn't look like that's going to happen in the next hour or two. And even if it does, it's not necessarily a case of flicking the switch and we've suddenly producing, 40 million barrels of oil again today. We have got a lot. The issue we now have is transportation. Effectively, a lot of these ships, they haven't been able to offload for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They've got to get in, deliver what's already on board, then start to restock and move it. We're talking logistically about traveling oceans here. It's not like we're traveling on the M62. So that is going to put a pressure on inflation. And whilst the battle was almost won with CPI and getting down to the low twos, the longer that this goes on, the more pressure that's going to put, the increase that's going to have on inflation. And then the Fed, you know what they're going to do? What's the point in dropping interest rates if inflation is on the rise? And so that very well could spook the market. And I suppose, the market may have priced in the fact that the freeze has already happened, but we don't know how dovish or hawkish Chairman Powell is going to be when he speaks. So for me, 6:30 tomorrow, the press conference, I think will be an interesting time to just see how the market reacts from there. So certainly want to bear that one in mind. Right, I think we're going to end that there and just move on to some charting. But I did get asked the question. The person sent it as a DM to me, and I did send them a message saying I was going to talk about it tonight, but I said I wouldn't use their name. And the reason is because it's a question, this genuine question they sent through, they were just thinking about Tau and BitTensor. And the question is it possible that Tau will not reclaim its last all-time high of around 745? And behave like, say, ETH did last cycle, where it just didn't perform as once did. And I thought it was an interesting time to sort of, I suppose, question the strength of BitTensor, because, it has been one of the more successful altcoins over the last sort of 10 days or so. So I'm going to try and answer it as honestly as I can. And the honest answer is I don't know. None of us really know. I can see a whole host of reasons as to why it will absolutely smash its all-time highs, but I'm also rooted in the real world where I've seen assets just as strong, just as popular, not do so well. So that's certainly something to bear in mind. I think the reality of any altcoin, whether it be BitTensor, Ethereum, Solana, Pippin, whatever, is, can it still capture the imagination? And in a time it is moving from one bull cycle to another bull cycle, is it developing sufficiently enough? Is it growing sufficiently enough that anyone else, any of these copycats that come along can't surpass it? And I think that's a problem that potentially the likes of Ethereum have in terms of, effectively being a layer one, and a use case for, gas and transactions and everything else. And then you've got the likes of Solana, which came along and did it faster and cheaper, and basically became the protocol for meme coins. So we've got a great use case for it, and it suddenly exploded compared to how Ethereum did. And I suppose the concern would be, and it happens across, cycles with many other assets or many other cryptos in many other sectors, that actually other ones just come along and ultimately outperform them. And so I think that's something that we have to bear in mind. A lot of us thought that BitTensor would smash 750, this cycle with ease, but that has not been the case. I've been very vocal about how BitTensor has kind of done over the grander picture, and it hasn't performed well ultimately. So what can it do to actually make sure that it does maintain all-time highs? I think one of the biggest successes it needs is the subnets, obviously. And what I mean by that is I think subnets have to capture the wider imagination. To do that, they need to start delivering. At the moment, and I'm not finger on the pulse kind of guy with subnets, of course, but effectively there's 128 subnets, of which very few are, real world delivering a need, shall we say. I'm sure there are some out there that are providing a service, whether or not it's an actual need right now. I don't know, but that needs to change. That narrative kind of needs to flip it, and it needs to flip, and then that message be spread at the right time. If we are still in a bear market, spreading that kind of message now, yeah, you're going to capture the diehards that are in the ecosystem, but there is something about just timing. Hey, look how great we are. Look at how well we are doing. And if they can sort of time, sort of a lot of these subnets taking off, actually maybe disrupting some of the more centralized routes out there, centralized systems that are being used, and get that narrative out at a time in which the market and interest is starting to pick up, then hell, yeah, of course, they can make that move up. Now, do I think AI is going anywhere? Not particularly. So it is at least rooted in a fairly decent sector. And as much as I don't really know too much about subnets, I'd obviously know about BitTensor, and I still think it is capable of delivering an actual need. I think it just needs to be able to disrupt a very closed system at the moment, and that's always a bit of a coin toss, if I'm honest. So to say, will it flounder like Ethereum? Well, to give Ethereum its dues, it did technically set a new all-time high of around about $100 higher than the previous cycle, so it got there. And so, if you think about what BitTensor has done through this cycle, and it only came in 2023, but the reality of it was, at some stage it was down even on this chart at 28, and it got to 750, okay? So when we talk about it, we are talking about 25x in terms of how it has been able to move. So let's not write it off too much. Just hasn't done particularly well from when the vast majority of us got in and continued to buy in there. Do I think it will get another 25x from this position? I think that is probably unlikely. I used to think that maybe it had that longevity, but just my view on altcoins is in general, and just the amount of money that they're bringing in, has kind of changed my mindset on that one. And obviously I'll be happy to be proved wrong with it. But a 3x from its current position, I genuinely don't think that's too difficult to do. I think the question is going to be is how well can it hold up when the rest of the market is falling away? We've seen BitTensor defy the markets. Matter of fact, back in October and November, when Bitcoin was crashing from the October 10 crash, BitTensor climbed. And okay, BitTensor fell when Bitcoin fell over the last couple of weeks, but it has absolutely outperformed it over the last 2 weeks. And so can it hold on to some of those gains if the market does turn and fall back down, and it find its bottom at a better position relative to the rest of the market? Then of course it's got a good chance of getting up there. I think now, given how much time you've invested in BitTensor, given if you are invested in subnets, and you're not willing to sidestep the market through the bear market, and until you can do some research, then you might as well stick with BitTensor. But keep an eye on if anything else is coming out there that you think may disrupt it, and just be open-minded to that when the next bull market recommences, should I say. Anyway, that's my view on that one there. I hope it answers your question. on it. Right, well, since we've got BitTensor's chart open, we might as well take a look at it. And I think, on the weekly time frame, it is fairly interesting as to what kind of initially right now has managed to halt BitTensor's stellar progress through that. And it doesn't take a genius to look through all these horrible lines that I still have on my charts and say, well, even off your last week's candle, we were starting to get pretty tired at the 50 EMA on the weekly time frame. And so far this week, 5 days to go, I know, we've smack bang man straight up into it at 300 weekly time frame. And that's the point in which we have turned around, and we have, at least for the that time being, found it's too exhaustive to get past and through that sell wall at that level. So I think from the weekly time frame, there's some obviously telltale signs of where that's going. But we drop down to the daily time frame, and we can start to see a bit of a better picture as to how that's playing out, because the RSI down the bottom is also telling us a bit of a story right now. But back onto the candles at the moment, we've come through, we broke through the 200 EMA, and then again, look at what held us back. The Gandalf line itself, 800 EMA daily time frame, 315 is what it used to be. It's now smack bang at 300. We hit that today, and we immediately turned around. Gandalf, you shall not pass. And that's what we've done. Now, the good news is we came slamming back down to the 200 EMA, which managed to find support. So what could happen over the next few days? We could just get squeezed between these two. Now, that typically leads to an explosive move. It's just which direction does it go? The one thing I do have to say, just reining it in after such a positive move, and one of the reasons I decided it, I'm going to just close the long and I'll look to see if I find another re-entry if we can. It's just where we were on the RSI. It has been a very strong move up there. We got into the 80s. You'll have a look historically at all. I mean, do it in your own time, but all the times we get to those levels, they all tie in with sharp pullbacks within the markets, okay? So you just got to kind of bear in mind that we actually maybe just getting to a point where exhaustion is starting to take in. We are going to see a little bit of selling time. And as great as it is, a lot of people sort of, they love seeing 70, 80% increases in a matter of days and think, perfect, we've gone up in that time. Perfectly logical, it's a crypto. And they never seem to accept that actually it could come down just as fast, if not faster. Of course, that can happen. That's how crypto kind of works. And so it's not dictated that it has to now make a slow move back down. It could be just as fast, just to correct that. And if you don't think that happens, just have a look at what happened in and around, October 10. I mean, the day of October 10 itself, that red candle there. But even in the days afterwards, we had this monster move up from, 200 to 420, and then all the way back down to, 340. So pretty much 50% of its loss. So in the space of 7 days, we went up, we doubled in value, and then lost half of that on the way back down. So it can absolutely happen that way. And I just think, just with where the RSI at the moment is, I just want to just sort of take a breather there. Now, as I said, the rest of the things are all looking good. Yes, we've got some vector candles within that range there, but as long as we can hold this 200 EMA around about 270, let's call that one, and just build some support on that, we're building some energy to try and reattack that 800 EMA. And as long as we get back into or away from the overbought territory, we can bind ourselves a bit of time for that next move up. Now, the one thing that I would say looking at this is, again, it's hard to tell, but even on the daily close at the moment, we haven't managed to clear our last high, if you will, back from January. And yes, okay, one of the wicks kind of tied in with where price was on the highest one there, but I'm looking at the daily closes here, and we just haven't done it yet. So it's another current attempt to break the trend of the downtrend that we're having, but we haven't done it. And the worry then is that if we do fail from here, it's another evidence point of a failed high. And we go back to 2025, we had a repeated occurrence where we kept close all the time to taking the new high. Never happened. We just continued with the downtrend back down there. So I think that's something to look for there. But yeah, I can't fault the move. And as I said on Friday, for those of you that stuck with BitTensor, or for those of you that managed to buy in the low 100s, don't be afraid to take a bit of profit, even if you're just recycling that profit to move into something else. We drop it down to the 4-hour. And again, we had a period where we were starting to form a bit of a bearish divergence on the RSI. So we obviously had this move up here, but during that period, we also had that there. Now, RSIs typically break, and we have started to see that we haven't had an increase in the price, but even if Bitcoin did get above 295, this is still fairly low. We're still seeing that bearish divergence. So again, at some stage, we are going to see that correction, that sort of reallocation. From the 4-hour time frame, though, I mean, if we were to sort of break, and now I'll get rid of this RSI because it's in the way. You just look at the journey we've had over the last week. The 10 just beautifully holding us up. We've come back down. We've retested the 20. And so far, that was enough to at least give us that impetus to move back up. If the bearish divergence ultimately plays out and we need to find that correction, which you would logically expect at some stage, then the 50 EMA, tying in with the 800 EMA on the 4-hour, around about 245, that's a level I'd be interested in, particularly as it was a little bit of a stopping point on the shoulder on the way up a couple of days ago. Just kind of building, at least from a smaller time frame, a bit of support in which it can act from that. That's where I'd be kind of, maybe not the word expecting, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that go down there. And I'm just wondering if we make this move, what's that? Top to top. So 120, so take off 60. 60 would be 240 from 300, wouldn't it? So that is also tying in with a 50% pullback. For me, might not look like it because we want a log movement chart, remember, but trust me, the maths is there. For me, that's again, a 50% pullback from the high. That again would make sense. Finding support on the 50 EMA, which tied in with the 800 EMA, which tied in with sort of previous bit of support and resistance. I would certainly have that as an area that I would be wanting to have a look at, seeing where it's going, and maybe that's an ideal opportunity for me to try and pick another long. So that's what I'd be looking at from that. I don't think the hourly is going to tell us anything more. Not really. I mean, look, there's all these vectors to recover. And the reason I've not talked about them this week is because we're not ranging now. We've broken through. We failed to make a new high here, then I expect to take all of these vectors back because I expect us to go lower. But right now, we're not in a range, so I don't think it's anything we really need to ultimately talk about there. Let's just quickly go through Bitcoin, daily time frame, try and make a little bit more sense of what we were looking at, and then we'll just see where we are. So we had that battle with the 50 EMA, and you can kind of now see with the cloud over the last sort of week or so that how strong that battle's been. But we got through it in the end. And as I said today, the top of the cloud is kind of where we found that resistance. Now, we got 3 and a bit hours to go. It's only $300 in it. Maybe this will print as a red candle. I don't think it's going to be enough necessarily to sort of say, right, well, that's it. We can do another 9 days now. But it will buck that trend that we are seeing there. And again, in terms of some of the other levels of how high this could ultimately go, if we can stay above the 50 EMA. So 73,000 is an area that we'd be looking at, kind of ties in with the open and closes of these candles from the sharp red drop, but then also this green candle here. That'd be where we'd be looking to hold for support. And then moving up, it's 81,500, so that's sort of 82 to 79,000 range, just building that picture. It's where the 800 EMA sits. There's obviously some wick and price action from the previous fall down there, although some may argue you want to take it up to the daily closes. And in that case, it's around about 84, but suddenly we're starting to stack levels there. But I really do think that 79 to 82,000, it just has a lot of interest in and around it. And that's where I feel it's probably the best opportunity, if that's the right word, for that bull trap to turn around. I think we'll be getting a lot of people excited around that stage there. And I think it's an ideal opportunity then to see the market take that correction from us. I'm trying to capture, here we go. Daily time frame for Bitcoin, the RSI, it's getting warm, but it isn't too hot at the moment. So obviously there's still room for that to run, which isn't the case that we saw with BitTensor. In terms of the 4-hour time frame, so kind of a similar story to BitTensor in terms of, snaking quite nicely along the EMAs, making these higher highs and higher lows as it does it. Okay, it shows you the 20 EMA a lot more, but generally that 10 EMA has been able to capture it. We've not been down to the 50 EMA since sort of middle of last week, so maybe there's some room to get in there, and we can see we are, you know, flirting with overbought territory on the RSI. So still got room to run. It's not saying that we are overbought yet, but if we start getting much higher in price, people will probably start talking about a potential bearish divergence unless we see a real big move up on the RSI, and even that's going to paint a picture of getting to considerably overbought kind of level. And then it's just, well, how do we fall back down? Well, now we're on the 4 hours. We're not using the daily, the weekly, or the 12-hour, but the 4 hour 50 EMA taking us back into this vector candle here, 71,500. Now that's a level we've talked about in terms of taking price back down there. And if you want to take it even lower to sort of that 71,000 level, there's the 800 EMA tying in with this. So I think they're the levels I would be interested in looking at on the lower time frames as well. But right now, it is holding it and it's doing fairly well. So I don't know. I would say I'm paralyzed. That's not necessarily the word I'm looking for, but I'm indecisive in what to do. So I'm not really taking a long or short on Bitcoin at the moment. I'm just going to wait to see how the charts play out. And at some stage, yeah, I expect that there, but I think that could easily happen first. And if that did happen, then I would be interested. That's the thing. But right now, sitting in the middle, I just can't find the motivation to go along and ultimately do that. Let's talk about Pippin, shall we? Just quickly, because I know some people trade it here, and I'm one of them. But it had a hell of a fall over the last couple of days. So basically, it was a stable coin for the month of March, in and around about 32 to 38 cents. And then, interestingly enough, though, never really breaking through the 50 EMA. If that's not an alarm bell for taking a short, I'm not sure what is. And then yesterday we had this strong move down. We are on the 4 hour time frame, and I thought I'd try and catch a falling knife. It was a low amount of money, but I tried to didn't really play with any stops, and so that one has burnt out from today. As the stop was at 13.9, or the liquidation point, should I say, and we did dip below that. But just looking at this falling, you know, if this was green candles, I'd be telling you at some stage that I think the market, you know, this is going to get a reflective bounce back up, despite what the market is doing. It's incredibly oversold on this one here, down, you know, one stage down at 12 on the RSI, red candle after red candle after red candle. Now, I don't follow the fundamentals of Pippin. Maybe someone's rugged it. I don't think so. But maybe they have. But if that isn't the case, I do expect at some stage this to rally. And this thing rallies hard. And so I am looking at another long opportunity. We had this fall down here, you know, similar fall from grace. Okay, it pootled around for a bit, but then just look at how quickly it rallied back up. And so I think the risk reward, playing it with a small amount of money, but maybe just increasing the leverage, is a better opportunity to try and find it. And I have to admit, this is more feeling based than TA kind of based. But I do think there's potentially an opportunity even to get back to, you know, some of these EMAs. And just given how much support and resistance it had in and around that 50 and 200 or 800 EMA on the 4 hour time frame at around about 32 cents, you know, a reflective move back up there, I could absolutely see happen, even if it were to fall back down. But just trying to take a large piece of all of those vector candles as it goes back through. That's the aim of how we're going to try and play that one. And if I get burnt, I get burnt. That's the risk you sometimes take. With everything else, similar to Bitcoin and BitTensor, really. You know, we have had a positive move up, but a lot of things are looking overbought or moving that way. I'm just putting it on the daily so we can get a better picture of things. Ethereum did poke its head above that 2220 level. Good, back above the 50 EMA at the moment. As I say, a bit like Bitcoin, needs to stick the landing here. And if it can, that 2,700, 2,800 kind of level, tying in with the 250 EMA, that could tie in quite nicely with Bitcoin going to 80,000. Casper's been moving today and the last couple of days, but it is starting to dip its head even on the daily time frame above this. And we can see over time it has been relatively failed valleys. So I would realistically be wanting to sort of see how it does in and around that 4 cents level for anyone that's in it. And we're starting to see the picture with the rest of them. So yeah, okay, it might be slightly red today, but it's because we've had 4 or 5 days of sustained green across the board. XMR running into a bit of an interesting level. There's a lot of noise in and around this, and I just wonder whether or not it's ready for an explosion or not. But been held back at the 250 EMA at the moment. There's some. Oh, there's not. That's a rubbish line. There is some. It's even worse, but there is some sort of compression there. Now, last time we tried to draw a compression in a falling market, it went the opposite direction. But in theory, we would expect to see that. But all I'm sort of really trying to point out is that price is being squeezed at the moment. So we do expect an explosion. I'll let you decide which way it's going to go, because my last guess at that didn't work out too well. And Zcash, one that we've traded quite a bit as well. I just kind of slept on this one a little bit. A couple of days worth of beautiful explosion from 200 to almost 300, nearly a 50% increase. But we can now see that actually it's been held back here. And again, just as I do expect the market, given it's a bit hot, maybe it does just cool back off. We've taken some of these vector candles here. That being said, it is still above the 50 EMA, and it has bounced off that today. So maybe it has some area for it to support itself. Now, in terms of some of the other things to have a look at, we might be interested. The VIX is working its way back down. It's still at 22, and we have seen a bit of volatility over the last couple of days, but it is working its way back down. The dollar, whilst it did get above 100 at one stage, we're now back at 99.5, although I still expect strength within the dollar whilst all this is going on. And oil, everyone thought it was over and we were going back to normality, but actually that $76 is now looking like an ideal entry point as we come now up to $100 again. And we can really, this chart here has just showed you the stress that we're going to be having on oil prices across the world until this resolves itself. And again, I'm just not even going to bother getting involved in it. NASDAQ. Okay, so this week we have seen a bit of a recovery from the closure from last week. We were looking at sort of 24,000 as being an area of concern, but if we were really looking a bit closer for anything around about 24,200, just because of the 800 EMA, we have had that bounce back, but it's still showing generally that weakness I talked about on Friday, whereas yet we had for months that non-directional volatility. Now suddenly the volatility is still there, but it is being accompanied by lower highs and lower lows. And so it really is feeling that we're losing some of the strength within that. So maybe some of these big players are getting to the point where they have actually exited the positions as they've wanted to, and the market might just fall away. And it's a similar picture with the S&P. So yeah, we had a period to start off with where non-directional volatility was showing some strength. And as I say, the volatility is still there, but it is lower highs and lower lows. And a lot of people are talking about whether or not we suddenly start to see that plop down, as short as it may be. That's where we'd be looking. For me, I think on Friday I said 6,500, but maybe first alarm bell is a close below 6,600 as well. In terms of getting out. Gold and silver, they're kind of just flirting around at levels that they've been at for the past few days, maybe just trying to find a bottom. I'd be looking at sort of 4,900 for gold, 50 EMA. Can it hold that? Silver's actually already lost that. Oops. And so it's got a bit more work to do. But it's still in the fight. It hasn't lost the cloud yet. But I would like it to see it recover $82 as quick as it possibly can, get the right side of this. But again, we might just be looking for a low before moving up. In terms of some of the other things, Circle continuing to make its moves up. I mean, just well played to it there. Nvidia just kind of holding its own, a little bit of non-directional volatility itself, but at least it's kind of making highs and lows at the same time. Palantir back above that 50, maybe it's kind of ranging between 160 and 150 at the moment. Tesla ranging and holding this 400 as support. Coinbase. MicroStrategy, I don't think it's out of the woods, but it's back up to its 50 EMA. Astrid, for those that are in it, it definitely has its moments. I just don't know much about the liquidity, but ultimately still trending down. And I know there's some fundamentals that we're a bit more privy to in our group in terms of just sort of, okay, it's trending down. The accounts are out now. It wasn't particularly good. New board in place, new ideas, new future. We'll see how that translates with the investors. I think that's probably it, to be honest. I've rattled on for long enough. just on the poll. Thank you for those that did partake. Bull market recommencing, 20%. I smell a bull trap, 70%. And I think that's where I sit. Maybe I will be proved wrong on it, but this is something we've seen in other cycles. This is something that we thought may happen. And ultimately, as good as that move up to 80K is, it doesn't change the overall picture of where we currently find ourselves. And so, until that does, that's fine. But there will always be those that will just start getting suckered in. And doesn't matter how many times you hit them on the nose, they'll just always be ready for the next one. So I still think we're there for the bull trap at the moment. I think that's it for me. Obviously, Thursday, we will have a trading pub. Friday, I'll be here for charting. I am having a hell of a lot of fun with my Open Claw, my bot at the moment. I am in the infancy stages myself, but it's taken a bit of my time. But I am enjoying trying to set it all up, and I'm learning a damn sight about just how computers work and coding and all that stuff in the background, which I never really knew before. So I am still around. Obviously, if I'm a little bit quieter, it's because I'm just arguing with Telegram, my bot, about its inadequacies. But yeah, it's an interesting learning curve, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about it on Thursday. Other than that, though, enjoy the rest of your evening, enjoy the rest of your week. Please, as always, any questions, issues you need resolving or help with. I will say, I know sometimes people ask about subnets and stuff like that. And then whilst they don't ask me directly, I do see the question, but I just genuinely have no idea, why the API is not working or tau stats or whatever. So I'm not ignoring it because I don't know, don't want to help out. It's just I genuinely don't understand how to help out. So anything outside of that, I will try and jump on as quickly as possible. That's it for me. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Cheers now.